I say this all the time, learn jazz, make music. But of course, if you want to make music, you kind of need to know some songs that you can make music with. So in this video, I'm going to go over 10 jazz standards that I think are great places if you want to get started playing jazz. And actually, really just in any case, whether you're just beginning or you're already playing jazz, these are 10 songs that you want to have in your vocabulary. They're useful, they're common, they're played a lot, and they're also really great examples of some very typical things for jazz. When I'm talking about the songs, I'm of course going to be talking about the chords that you have in there, the scales that you need, and stuff like that, but I'm also going to talk about the form of the pieces. And that's because knowing the form and understanding the form of songs is something that's actually really useful if you want to learn more songs. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to learn a lot of different songs. Just think of it like this: if you already know a 12-bar blues, then another 12-bar blues is of course really easy to learn, and the same goes for understanding the form of a jazz standard. Another thing that I'm also going to talk about is that if you're coming from a certain place, then certain standards are going to be better places to start for you, because some of them will emphasize certain things and be fitting better to where you're coming from and make it easier for you to transition into playing jazz. If you already know a lot of songs and you're looking at this list and you're thinking, well, actually I think this one should have been in there, then leave a comment on the video, because I think that's a really useful discussion. And actually it's also really important to just have a lot of suggestions for solid beginners tunes that are not too difficult. Also for us that already play, because if there's an easy song that we don't know, then that's a good one to just check out and have in there and just add something to your vocabulary. My name is Jens Larsen. Learn jazz, make music. The first standard on the list is Take the A Train, old Strayhorn standard. I think this is a great example of a very basic AABA form, and it's also in a fairly simple key, because usually you'll play this in C major. There are not that many chords in there, and most of the time you're really just staying in the key, and you need to go out a little bit to a secondary dominant, which is just useful for you. The melody is really clear, so you can really hear when the chords are changing. The most important thing about this is probably that it's an AABA form. So a lot of jazz standards are actually 32 bars, and one way that we sort of divide those 32 bars is that we have an A section of 8 bars that's repeated, then we get a bridge, and then we get a repeat of the A section again. This way of understanding the standard really means that we only have to learn 16 bars to learn the song. So it's important to realize when something has an AABA form. The video that I'm using here is Joe Henderson playing Take the A Train. And I think he's a really great example of somebody who takes a really simple song and then actually really does a lot with it. He's really good at playing it both so that it makes sense from sort of a very basic point of view, but also really adding a lot on top of it. I also made a video where I'm analyzing his album version of this song, where he's playing a duo with the drummer Gregory Hutchinson. Cantaloupe Island by Herbie Hancock is the only modal piece that I have on this list, I think. And that's really because it's a great piece to have. It's fairly simple, and it's also a piece that you can actually improvise on if you only use pentatonic scales. So if you're coming from really playing a lot and you're used to improvising, but you're not that at home in playing major scales and improvising with diatonic arpeggios, well then working with Cantaloupe Island is really good, because you're still going to be playing changes. You have to change scales throughout the different chords. There are not that many of them, and you can really just play sort of from island of sound to other island of sound, which is of course what a modal piece is. And in that way you have some music you can play while you're also starting to work on your major scales and learning your arpeggios and all those other kind of things that you need if you want to play some more traditional jazz standards. And even though this is a really simple piece with only 3 different chords, then it is something that you can actually play really great solos on. And the version that I'm using here is a version from Pat Metheny, where he's playing it in a trio setting with Steve Swallow. There's also some really great versions from Herbie Hancock, especially one where he's playing with Leonard Luege, that is really fantastic. The blues. Of course, the 12-bar blues is such an important progression in jazz music, and blues is anyway a really huge part of jazz. This version that I have running here is George Benson playing Billy's Bounce, and that's of course a great example of somebody improvising on a 12-bar blues. When you start with playing the blues, then probably you want to start with 2 keys. You want to start with F and B flat. And you also want to be aware that if you're coming from playing rock music and more pentatonic things, then it can be quite difficult to transition into making jazz lines, because the jazz blues is a little bit different. There's not going to be that much minor pentatonic stuff happening. And in that way, it can actually be a better choice to start with another song, so that you're not going to stuck with having the habits of playing a 12-bar blues. For the rest, you do need to check out the 12-bar blues. It's really important. It's a huge part of jazz, and it's something that everybody plays, so it's going to be called on sessions all the time, and therefore you want to do it. When you start working on the 12-bar blues, then make sure to also learn some themes, and make sure to also take some themes that are really clear about the changes, because that's really going to help you. If you have a song like Tenor Madness that really tells you, okay, now we're on this chord, now we're on this chord, then that is really going to help you hear what the difference is between the chords, and it's going to make it easier for you to improvise over them and really get the changes across in your solo, which is something that can be very difficult in the beginning. Satin Doll is another Ellington Strayhorn piece on this list, and I think this is a great example of a song that's actually quite traditional, and of course it's usually played in the key of C major, but it also has a few sort of modal things in there, and that means that it's really useful for just checking out that bridge between where things are tonal and where things are modal, which is maybe a complicated topic. It's also a composition that actually has a tritone substitution built into the song, and that really helps you hear that quite important progression that's very typical for jazz, and it's going to be your gateway to also alter dominance. For the rest, it's just a great example of a very typical AABA, so a 32-bar form in jazz, and it has the typical Ellington Bridge, which is really this version of going to the 4th degree with a cadence and then using the same kind of cadence to go to the 5th degree to go back. Blue Bossa is a song that you want to have in your repertoire because it's very common. Everybody knows Blue Bossa, so that's really useful for a song if you're jamming a lot with other people. It's also a great place to start if you want to check out some really basic minor chord progressions. The song is usually played in C minor, and it's just great to have some really basic examples in a not too fast tempo of a minor cadence, so that you can get really good at getting used to playing harmonic minor on the dominant and just really checking out what it is to play in a minor key. Autumn Leaves is another song that is so common and that everybody knows, and that alone means that it makes sense to learn it and have that in your repertoire. Besides that, it's not really a very difficult tune. It's one of the more difficult songs in this list. It's also a great example of a song that has most of the different chords that you're going to come across in a key, and that way it's a great place to start checking out how you can actually use more chords, because a lot of the other songs that I'm going over here really cycle around the same chords most of the time. Perdido is the final Ellington Strayhorn tune that I have on this list. It's not actually written by those two, but it is of course associated with the Ellington Orchestra. And I think maybe it also says something about the importance of Ellington and Strayhorn in the development of jazz, that on a list like this you have 3 of their tunes. It's a great tune. It's an AABA, and I think it's a very simple A part, and it's really just good in cycling some basic cadences that you definitely want to have down, your 2-5-1 cadences in the key. And another thing that it has is that the bridge is a rhythm bridge, which is also something that's really useful to check out. I didn't include rhythm changes on this list, and that's mainly because I think that that's actually a more complicated thing to check out, and in the beginning that's not where you want to start. You want to start with some tunes that are a little bit simpler. Ironically, the 3 first standards that I learned are not on this list. But when I learned the first standards and I was checking out that in the beginning, then I was not guided by anybody, and I was just choosing standards that I liked, which of course is also important. It's just as important that you're really motivated to learn them, and it's not like you have to learn these 10 as the first songs. You should go with what you want to learn. But at the same time, when I did that, I wasn't really helping myself, because the first 3 songs that I learned were Green Dolphin Street, Stella by Starlight, and There's No Greater Love, and they were all pretty difficult for me at the time, and they took a lot of effort to get through. And if I started with something that was a little bit more simple, then probably it would have been a little bit easier. That's at least also what I'm trying to get my students to do. Summertime is another fairly basic standard that's often played in a tempo that's not too fast, and it's also a great place to get started if you want to check out some songs in minor, because it has like long stretches of minor, especially if you want to check out some melodic minor that you can use on a tonic minor chord. And also another reason why you want to check this one out is that one of the most famous jazz guitar compositions is Wes Montgomery's 4-on-6, and that's actually based on Summertime, so that's also a good reason to learn this song. This list is of course a list of suggestions of songs that you should learn, so it's not like you have to learn these, but if you're looking for songs to learn, then maybe one of these songs might be a good fit for you if you like it, And for the rest, take other songs, take what you want to learn. It's as important that you stay motivated to keep on practicing if you want to learn them. But you need to do yourself the favor to really learn these songs by heart. Whatever you're learning, make sure that you know the melody by heart, make sure that you know the chords by heart, and use that so that you really can internalize it and just worrying about playing music when you're improvising on them. For the rest, of course, I'm also still really curious if you think that there are songs missing from this list, then leave a comment on this video. Solar is usually credited to Miles Davis and it's also on his tombstone, but in fact it wasn't written by him. He stole it from Jock Wayne, who's an American guitar player living in New York, I think mostly associated with bebop, and who's for the rest not that famous as far as I know. But it's a great tune to check out, and it's essentially it is a take on a minor blues. It's a 12-bar form. You would usually play it in C minor, and it's a nice, also a melody that really gets the C minor melodic sound across quite well. It also has a lot of 2-5-1s to different key centers, which is something that somehow is kind of typical for that period of the late bebop where they were starting to write tunes and not only writing tunes on top of standards. And for that it's quite typical and a good tune to check out without being too complicated. And in some ways it's actually less complicated than a normal minor blues. Another guitar player that's really associated with Solar is of course Pat Metheny. And the version that I have here in this video is him playing with Jack DeJohnette and Dave Holland and Herbie Hancock, and that's a really great version of this. It's a live recording of a Jack DeJohnette band. We've covered most of the different kind of forms that are very common in jazz now because we've had the AABA, we had different kinds of 12-bar forms and 16-bar forms. But one form that's actually very common that I didn't have any examples of is the form that's either called ABAC or AB, which is just kind of splitting the form in two and you have two halves, each being 16 bars long. This is an example that All of Me is a great example of this. It's fairly simple. I think one of the reasons why this is a good tune to check out, it's a little bit more complicated than the other songs on the list, but the melody is extremely clear, so you can really hear the changes in the melody, and that makes it a great song to check out, because just learning the melody, which is easier to hear than the chords in the beginning, then you can already start to hear the chords, and that's a very important aspect of it. But the rest is just a great example of this type of form, and that's a very common form in jazz. You will find that with a lot of really common pieces like It Could Happen to You and There'll Never Be Another You and Days of Wine and Roses. There are really a lot of those, and it's also good to have some examples, but usually they're a little bit more complicated in terms of chords